Hello. Let's talk about for loops in Python. But let's see what. So your for loop, your theoretical for loop, abstractly, if you will. I'm using the OCR exam reference language. It's meant to be pseudocode, but it's technically a like Turing complete programming language, and then you can build an interpreter for it, which feels like it's slightly defeating the purpose. But hey, OCR be OCR. In the OCR reference language and in pseudocode, for loops, which is definite iteration, right? Iteration is you repeat something, but you don't just rep, you it. In that step 2 might be different than step 1, if anything, because you have the number is now 2 rather than 1. So this is for I, for the name of my variable equals the starting point to the ending point, the inclusive ending point. So I is going to take all values between 0 and 9. So it's going to print I equal 0, and then, sorry, next I wraps your loop, right? And then 2, and then 3, and 4, and then 5, and then 9, and then stop. So let's try and see if we can do this in Python. So in Python, the thing about for loop is the for loop is a for each. So you do for, call it E for element, in a list. Let's have A, B, wait, I want to put some quotes, C, D, and then let's style it, try to have spaces after your commas in list. For, that's the top line of your for loop, colon, press enter, your IDE will often indent itself, but if not, you will want to indent. If I want to print, print E, print the element. So for loops in Python are slightly different because, let's run it in, A, B, C, and D. So a for loop in Python is for variable in the list, and we iterate over each element of the list. So the name of that variable, that identifier, will take every values in that list. So how do you convert from? So this is already like the base syntax of the loop is what we call in other languages a for each, because it's for each of the elements of the list. It's not a numerical for loop. So to do your standard for, and you will have used this, I'm sure, you do for I in, and you will use range. Now range, remember, this is a console, please use it. So if I do A equal 2, and then print 2, that's Python. For things where if you want to do, constructs like for I in range 2, colon, then this is helping you, but you need to, just because there is the dot dot dot, you still need to put the indent, right? So space space, and then print I. Enter again, this is telling you, tell me if you're finished with that block or not, and then if you don't indent the next line, it means you're finished, it will run it in, and that will 0 and 1. So the first thing to notice is range. You can, of course, you can Google range, Python documentation and whatnot, but even bigger. Range 5 is, that's very helpful, thank you very much. How about list range 5? So this is just in time evaluation. Python is not going to want to evaluate until we tell it. So I just want the explicit list that's made from that. And that node, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's still 5 elements, right? So range will start at 0. So range, if you just do range or list range and one parameter, it will start at 0. You can also list range, let's say 1, 5. Now it will start at the first one and end before the last one. So remember, this is excluding the upper bound, the exclusive upper bound. So before it reaches that number. So this is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, right? And you can even say, let's have between 1 and 50, and I think it's like this in steps of 3. Yes, 1, 4, 7, 10, and so on. And although, it doesn't end quite at 50, it's whichever is the element that's the largest element that is below the second parameter, that upper bound, that exclusive upper bound, and generates a list. So what you're doing in here when you're doing the for I in range is that really you're generating a list that's going to, so if you want this way they give the example between 0 and 9, so to have 10 elements, inclusive of 0 and inclusive of 9, then in Python, you need to say range 10, which means it's going to stop before 10. For I in range 10, print I. That is your other, if you will, design pattern for for indefinite iteration in Python. So the first one is going to run ABCD and then 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, right? Range for I in range 10 takes me between 0 and 9. Yeah, and there's yet a third type of for loop, which is more repetition than iteration. So sometimes I may want to have, so if instead of like print I, I'd say print hello. So that's a surefire way of making sure I will print hello 10 times. I will happen to print hello 10 times starting at 0 and ending at 9, but because I'm not using the iterator variable, that's the name of I is the iterator, that's why I'm calling it I by convention. It's going to print ABCD, of course, but then hello 10 times. So let's put this back to an I. So if you want to just repeat something, essentially if you get a for loop where you do not need the iterator, the convention in Python is to put an underscore. You could still, that's a valid variable name, as you know, right? Underscore is allowed. In fact, Python is uppercase, lowercase, number, underscore, and variables can start by an underscore. They can't start by a number. So that's why you can't just have a variable called 2, right? But they can start by an underscore, meaning that just the underscore is completely valid. And so if I do this, it's going to print ABCD, then 0 to 9, and then 0 to 9 again, because this one was iterating with I, this one was iterating with underscore. But the underscore trick, if you will, there's just a convention to say, if you are doing a definite iteration, but it's more repetition than iteration in that you will not use the value of the iterator variable. So if I want to say print hello 10 times, maybe like twice, 3 times, all right, fine. And then it's ABCD, 0, then 9, hello, hello, hello. So in your coding, in your projects, in your exercises, bear that in mind. This one is sort of like, advanced. It's more like a Python convention. You could completely do it with I. No one's going to call that, iterator or whatever, right? It doesn't matter. But if you want your code to look Pythonic, to say, yeah, I've kind of, I know the tricks of the trade, then this is a nice way, because it indicates to anyone reading your code that we're doing just a repetition 3 times. We're not going to worry about that. You wouldn't do a for, you could do a for underscore in ABCD, but that would be a bit weird because then you've got a list, so you've got explicit values that this will take, but you're not actually using those values, just taking them in your underscore that you're not reading from. So you just want this printed 4 times, so that's a bit odd. So I'm just going to leave it like that and take the public, the URL of this, so you'll have it under the video, and I will make sure not to, because I've done this for Fizzbirds, and I apologize, I will make sure not to actually use this REPL for something else, as I often do, because I'm just like, I just want to write some Python, whatever, so that you can see those 3 types of loop. But in key, the real for is a for each. You will find yourself, if you want to do a numerical for, you need to use the range function. The range functions also allow start, stop, and step. Note that you can even do something like 10, 1, -1, right? That works too. I don't know, it's taking so long, 10, 9, So now, suddenly remember, so it's still exclusive of that one. So if you actually want it, because it includes the first but not the second, so it's not about higher and lower, it's the first or the second. So it will include the 10 but not include the 1 and stop there. So you can do negative iteration backwards. You can't really go backwards in the list with just the for each, but sometimes you will, if you want to iterate over a list, but you want to iterate by index, you will sometimes see stuff done like range of len of your list. This allows you to like just have an iterator that will take all of the values of whatever the indices are. But you can play around. So maybe that will allow you, for instance, to do, well, I don't have my list here, but if I just call this, okay, fine. This is already slightly going beyond. Okay, L equal this. Oh, I'm changing it. I should have my main example on screen, so I should have done this. Okay. So that's a way, no, not the list, but it's called L. L bracket. This time I'm going to call it I because it's an index. Fair enough, right? You wouldn't call it E, by the way. You would give it a meaningful variable name that indicates whatever the elements of those lists that's constituted of. So in that case, maybe letter for letter in L, and then print letter, right? So if you were to do, actually, I'm going to want to iterate with like just -1, and then you can do I +1. So this is this kind of thing. So this is why typically in sort algorithms, right, when you're iterating over the list, but you need to be able to go before or after the index at which you are, you will use that range len thing, which is a bit unsightly at first, but now that you hopefully have unpacked it from the original conceptual for loop to the specific way they're done in Python, which is effectively a for each over a list, to how you can use the range function to get your more standard iterator, to how you can use the underscore with the range function if you're not using the iterator and just want to repeat things a certain number of times, to how you can still iterate over the elements of a list, but go via the length and the range to actually get the indices of the elements of the list. So we start at 0 and end at length of len -1. This should work. So the first one is going to do it A, B, C, D. Then it's going to because it's out of range, because that should have worked. I reject your. So it's length -2, presumably, right? Yes, because the length, so if the length, in that case, the length is 4, but we want my range to be 5, right? No, so it's 0, 1, 2, 3. So the range, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the second one will have just done, so A, B, C, D, A, C. Oh, sorry, I've done I plus I. Sorry. Yeah, so we're back here. I thought it was supposed to be, okay. Yeah, ignore the thing I just did. Not the thing I just did, the thing I did before I did the thing I just did to fix the thing I did before I did the second thing. Right, so now we've got B, it's a little bit in the middle. I could put some, let's put some, you know what, let's put some empty print so we can see what's going on. And a bit of air, right. White space. Right, so the first one, we're just iterating over the elements of L, A, B, C, D. The second one, we're using the range because we're going to want the next element, it's a bit of a cheat, to do B, C, D. It's not the most elegant way to do it, but conceptually, that's the idea. This is what you would use range of length of the list. Then you've got your simply numerical iteration. In that instance, it's a backwards one, so that's pretty nifty. You can do it, of course, in other steps and whatever. And then I have my sort of repetition type iteration where you ignore the iterator, and although this syntax would work well as well, the convention in Python is to use underscore as in a throwaway variable, so that there is never any meaningful value in that thing. It's just because the programming language requires me, I can't just do 4 in range, right? But it requires me to have an identifier here, and I'm putting it here to indicate to the next programmer reading this code, right? Which might very well be your future self. Okay, enough rambling. Oh gosh, it's almost at 15 minutes. Yeah, thank you for watching to the end, which frankly I doubt I wouldn't personally, but still, you're still here. No, thanks. Are we running down the clock for 1 more minute? Anyway, thank you, goodbye, and happy coding.